Welcome to Introduction to Pollination from Ivor Environment Centre. In today's video, you'll be learning about why bees are so important for pollination and food growing, how to dissect a flower, and how to hand pollinate flowers when there aren't other pollinators about. Why are bees important? Bees are pollinators. That means they carry pollen from one flower to another as they fly around looking for nectar. Nectar is the sweet substance at the bottom of a flower that bees use to make honey. When a bee lands on a flower, it will drink the nectar and get pollen stuck to the furry parts of its body. When that bee goes to another flower for more nectar, some of the pollen will brush off onto the stigma of the flower. If that is the right pollen, the flower will then be pollinated and make a seed. There are also other pollinators that do the same thing, like birds, bats, butterflies, beetles, and wasps. Bees and other pollinators are so important because the flowers need them to be pollinated so they can make seeds. Almost 90% of crops, like broccoli, strawberries, apples, and tomatoes, rely on bees to pollinate them. Without it, they wouldn't be able to grow their fruits and vegetables. But bees are in decline, which means there are less and less each year, and that might mean less food for us eventually too. To protect bees, we should make sure there are lots of wildflowers and safe spaces for them to visit. And we should make sure that we stop using pesticides and chemicals that could hurt them. Now we're going to learn how to dissect a flower. This lets us look at all the different parts of a flower and shows us where and how the seed is formed. So here in front of me I have got a tulip flower, and I've taken off some of the petals already so that you can see into the flower, and I've labelled them petals. I can also go ahead and label this part the stem of the flower, and I can label this part a leaf. Okay. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about what's inside the flower and what helps it grow a new seed at the end of the season. So what we're going to do is I'm going to carefully take off the rest of the petals so you can get a better look at the inside of the flower. Okay, you can carefully tip them off. Oh, I'm losing a few bits, but I've got enough left. Okay, and the last one. Okay, so what you can see now is what's left is the inside of the flower. Now, this part here, and you can see it's got some sort of like powdery dots on the top, is the stamen. Now this is the male part of the flower and it's what produces the pollen. Okay, we're going to be learning a little bit more about pollen in this video. So the pollen, this small yellow dotted powder, is what's really important for the plants to grow new seeds the next year. So the top bit here where the pollen is stuck to is called the anther. So I'm going to got a little bit down here. This part is called the anther, and the bottom part is called the filament. So this is where the pollen is made. I'm going to just take off the rest so you can see the next bit. There we go. And then what we've got left here is the female part of the plant. Now this is called the carpel, and it's made up of different parts. So at the top here, it is called the stigma, and this is often called the sticky stigma. And this is where the pollen from other plants and other flowers gets stuck to. Does anyone know how the pollen gets stuck to the sticky stigma? Does anyone know what brings the pollen to the sticky stigma? Did anyone guess bees? If you did, well done. So, pollen, you can see a little bit here, gets stuck to the sticky stigma. And when it's the right type of pollen, it will then travel down inside of the plant through this bit here, which is called the style. Okay, so it goes through the stigma, down through the style, and into the bottom here, which is where the plant has its ovary. Now this is where the seed would start to be made. And if it's the right pollen at the right time, perfect conditions, a seed will be formed here. So let's put our flower down and label the rest. So we have this top bit is the stigma. This bit is our style, and this bit is our ovary. And all together, that's called the carpel. So here we have our fully dissected flower. And you can do this as well if you want to. You can get your own cut flower, like I got this tulip from the supermarket, and you can cut up and take apart your flower to see all the different parts. Maybe try some different flowers at home to see what else you can find, and if there are different shapes to the different parts. What we'd like you to do now is create a labelled drawing of parts of the flower. If you want, you can grab a piece of paper and a pencil and draw along with me in the next clip. Remember, you can pause the video at any point if you need a little time to draw and write. Okay, so here's my example of how to do a labelled drawing of the inside of a flower. So here we have the petals. And then I'm going to draw the stem and label that. Now I'm going to draw the carpel, which is the female part of the plant. So I'm going to draw mine like the tulip that we saw earlier. Does anyone remember what this top part is called? That's right, it's called the stigma, and sometimes it's called the sticky stigma. So this part is called the style, and at the bottom here is the ovary, which is where the seed is made. Now on this side, I'm going to draw the male part of the flower. Does anyone remember what it was called? So it was called the stamen. On our tulip, it had a part like this and a part like that. The top part had lots of dots. Does anyone remember what those dots were? So the dots were pollen. They are on the anther. And the bottom part of the stamen is called the filament. Now here I have a labelled diagram of a flower. You can colour it in, you could make the stem green or the petals a nice colour and add any other labels that you want to. Hand pollination or mechanical pollination is used when normal animal pollination won't work. For example, in large greenhouses where they grow lots of flowers, pollinators like bees and butterflies won't be able to get in. So you could use hand pollination to pollinate all the flowers in the greenhouse. To hand pollinate flowers, you will need a cotton bud or a soft bristle paintbrush. Today I'm going to use these hellebores I found in the gardens here at Ivor. But to pollinate properly, only do this on flowers growing in your garden or in a flower pot. It won't work on cut flowers. I'm going to use cut flowers so you can see what I'm doing up close. Carefully brush the pollen off the anthers without breaking the petals or damaging the flower. Check that there is pollen on the paintbrush. You should be able to see small specks of pollen depending on your flower. Then brush the pollen off of the paintbrush onto the stigmas of the next flower. On this hellebore, you can see it on the purple parts of the flower. Now remember, this only works on flowers that are still growing. So make sure you do this in your garden and make sure you transfer the pollen from flowers that look the same but that are different. Otherwise, it won't pollinate correctly. If you want to try this at home, please remember to only do this in your own garden or house, or with permission from whoever owns a garden. Please don't do this in public spaces, as there may be gardeners that are already looking after the plants and flowers. After learning all about pollinators, where and how the new seed is made in a flower, and how pollination happens, we're going to have a closer look at the pollen grains themselves. This is a picture taken with an electron microscope. Electron microscopes allow us to take super detailed pictures of really small things like pollen, bacteria and cells, but they are very big and expensive microscopes. In this picture, there are 5 different types of pollen from 5 different flowers. Can you see how they are all very different colours and shapes? Every species of flower will have a different shape of pollen. That is why it has to be the right type of pollen from the right type of flower to make pollination successful and to grow a new seed. Here in this picture, you can see the flowers where the pollen is found. Can you see how the shape of the flower can be so different to the pollen? This last picture is taken with a less powerful microscope. The pollen has been stained with a dye, which is why they are all purple. But can you see how all the shapes are the same? Pause the video and take a moment to sketch one of the pictures of the pollen with the parts of your flower drawing from earlier. Okay, so today you have been learning all about pollination. And to finish you off, you're going to do a little summary activity. You are going to solve a mystery using what you've learnt about pollen. Now you don't need any equipment, You just need to make sure you're paying attention and you are focused. The mystery escapist. One of the students of Gardner Primary School was spotted outside their school grounds at lunchtime. A member of the public saw their school uniform but not the student's face, so they were not able to identify them to the head teacher. The teachers found a big hole in the fence next to a rhododendron bush, so whoever escaped must have climbed past the flowers to get out. Here you can see a picture of the rhododendron flowers, and next to it is a close-up picture of the pollen using a microscope. Make sure to look closely at the shape of the pollen. Everyone's jumpers were examined, and only 3 students were found to have pollen stuck to their jumpers. Samples of the pollen was taken from the jumpers and put under a microscope so that they could be compared to the pollen from the rhododendron flower. However, to make things tricky, there are other flowers on the school's grounds. Take a look at the pictures below. Do you see how they're all different shapes and patterns and how they look different to the rhododendron pollen? Okay, here we have the samples taken from the 3 jumpers. Look closely at pictures A, B and C to figure out which picture has pollen matching the rhododendron pollen. Remember, only the student that snuck through the fence would have rhododendron pollen on their jumper. Pause the video if you need to look at the pictures for longer. Okay, do you all have an answer? Make sure to write it down or keep it safe in your head. So, do we think it was A? No. As you can see in the picture, there is only pollen from the flowers in the sensory garden, like the sunflower, lavender and roses. So they can't have crawled past the rhododendron bush to get pollen on them. Do we think it was student B? No. They were with student A in the sensory garden before falling on the ground ivy flowers in the play area. But they don't have any rhododendron pollen on them, so it can't be them. That means it was student C. Student C has rose pollen, ground ivy pollen and rhododendron pollen on them, so they must have been the student that escaped through the hole in the fence. If you look closely at the picture, you can see that the pollen shapes match. Give yourself a pat on the back if you got the answer right. Well done if you got the answer right. You could be a forensic botanist, which means you'd be an expert and you'd use the different shapes and patterns of pollen to investigate and solve crimes. Okay, thank you for watching our video all about pollination. We hope you learned some things about how to identify different parts of a flower, how to describe how pollination works, and to explain why bees and pollinators are so important. And we want to say thank you to General Mills for helping us make this video. Goodbye!